But if there's a failure of ambition to build more housing, or there's too many barriers in the way, then you do not have the opportunities that you otherwise would have.
So that was New York Governor Kathy Hochul giving a speech on the importance of being able to build more housing in the state of New York to address the state of New York's housing crisis. Now, of course, this is something that I've been expressing for a very long time on this channel. I've done multiple different videos about how places like New York and California go the wrong way. They restrict building far too much, and this is the reason why we see an affordability crisis in those states, while on the flip side, on the contrast, states and municipalities that clean up their zoning code, that don't actually have any of these rent control or rent stabilization schemes, have seen rents fall dramatically. Again, the evidence is undeniable, the evidence is overwhelming, so it's a good thing to at least hear the New York governor rhetorically speak to that evidence. And one of the things that she is pushing in this budget negotiation is a reduction in the environmental review that these projects need to go through, because essentially this environmental review ends up having these projects take years. And as we talked about with the chips manufacturing plant that is supposed to be built in and around the Syracuse area, you are in a situation in the state of New York where random individuals, in that case 6 random individuals, can block a multi-billion-dollar project that they have no connection to due to the fact that they're alleging that there are environmental review problems. So this is the stage, this has been set, this is what they're supposed to be negotiating on, and obviously this is going to lead to more affordable housing being built in the state of New York, and all of our problems are going to be solved because the Democrats are on this case and they ran on affordability. Now, if you think that, you haven't been paying attention, because there's absolutely no chance you have no chance that they're gonna solve anything, because what ended up coming to fruition in terms of the proposal from the state assembly is actually more restrictions, more regulations, more rent control, more of all the things that don't work in the state of New York. And this is what we're going to talk about today, because no matter what, even when you have the governor saying all the right things, when you go to look at the bill, they're proposing all the things that don't work, all the things that will make things significantly worse, and somehow, some way, they proposed more environmental review, even though this whole entire process is about reducing the environmental review on these particular projects. So this is what we're going to talk about today, because I'm absolutely livid, if you can't tell. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay?
After a developer clears local zoning requirements, and if construction is site on so-called, quote, previously disturbed land, like an old strip mall or vacant lot, a developer could expedite or bypass what's known as the secret process altogether.
So the crazy thing is, when you hear the initial proposal about New York State's environmental review law and how it can be changed and streamlined in order to make projects built easier, you don't think this is common sense, we should definitely do that. You actually end up thinking to yourself, why are we not already doing that? Why is that already not the law? And the reason for that is because environmentalists are absolute idiots in every possible way. So a simple idea like, hey, if you already have a site built there and you want to convert said site from, let's say, a strip mall into some kind of housing complex, you shouldn't have to do an environmental review study in order to determine whether or not this will negatively impact the environment, because the environment is a damn strip mall. It's something that already disturbed the environment. You already built a thing there. Why do you need another environmental review? But again, that was the state of the law in New York State prior to this proposal up until this very moment. And theoretically, hypothetically, and I mean metaphorically, because it's definitely not going to happen in reality, the goal of the legislature was to fix this oversight, wink wink, it's intentionally there, in order to make building easier. And that is something incredibly simple. It's so stupid, you would think out there in the audience that it would be easy to pass, but guess what? The exact opposite is true, because rather than do that, rather than actually, move forward on being able to build housing, we have all these stupid environmental interest groups who want to tell us that we can actually do both things. We can actually preserve the environment, which by the way is true, but they mean have all these environmental regulations. And in addition to that, on top of everything else, we can also build more housing. But the thing is, these people want these stupid ass studies. These people want these absurdities. And a perfect example is in this Spectrum One news segment, they actually interview a woman who's like, well, what if you're building housing on a place that used to have a gas station near it?
Still, environmentalists say they need stricter definitions to protect land and future tenants.
Currently contaminated areas. Let's say there's interest in developing where there was once a gas station.
What if you shut up? What if you shut your stupid face? What if everyone like you was banned from lobbying the government, banned from speaking, banned from voting? You know what would happen? We would have affordable housing all across New York State rather than a housing crisis throughout this state that constantly, according to study after study, is been caused by lack of supply in the marketplace. That would be a solution. We make you stop talking, stop going to the press, stop lobbying the government, and then problems get solved because people stop listening to you because for whatever reason, even though you're an absolute dumbass in every possible way who wants to stop an entire development due to the fact that there was a gas station nearby at some point in time and gasoline makes you uncomfortable because you're an idiot, because you're a fool, yeah, let's ignore you, let's tell you to shut the hell up and then actually have some progress being made throughout our society. Actually address the affordability crisis, which again is caused by low supply. It is not that complicated, people. It is not that convoluted. You have demand go up, supply stay same or supply reduce, price goes up. I know, again, to the economic flat earthers that call themselves socialists, this is like a foreign concept. I know you guys might be thinking, is it Wall Street greed? Is it Wall Street developers that are so greedy? Is it BlackRock or Blackstone? Are they the ones causing prices to go up? Even though, again, what we see is that the places that don't ban institutional investors or any of these stupid ass populist policies that are meant to distract you but just allow building have lower rents. Again, look at the chart. Look at the chart. Look at it. Look at it, you absolute idiots. Look at Austin, Texas. Look at Nashville, Tennessee. Look at all these different cities in Florida. If you allow build, if supply go up, then guess what? Price go down because it's able to meet demand.
It's rare when developers and environmentalists agree. But when it comes to Governor Kathy Hochul's plan to reform the State Environmental Quality Review Act, they're on the same page.
Look, I don't want to yell through this whole entire video, but do you guys understand out there in the audience that I actively despise Governor Kathy Hochul? I hate this woman. I do not want her in office, but the fact is, she's at least proposing, she's at least talking about maybe doing the right thing, and just like Jacob Fry in Minneapolis, who I'm not a fan of, who did actually clean up Minneapolis's zoning code, and by the way, rents went down as a result of that, building go up, make easier to build, they build things, it's really that simple, then prices go down. And by the way, they did this while their twin city, St. Paul, passed one of the most strict rent control policies in the entire country, and guess what? Their prices actually went up in comparison to Minneapolis because rent control and rent stabilization don't work. But guess what? This policy that was supposed to be about cleaning up environmental review, making it easier to build, has more rent control attached to it, more inclusionary zoning, more things that need to be put in our dumbass housing lottery program, regulated rents, which obviously is going to destroy building. And when you get a load of the absolute insanity of this particular policy, your mind is going to be blown away because they want to up the requirements for these developments that need to be approved by the state or by the local municipalities to 50% of the units to be held below market rate, which means in a rent control or rent stabilization program, and the rest of the units in these private developments can be market rate. Now, of course, obviously that is going to raise the cost of building. It's going to raise the cost of those market units. But in addition to that, they decided to make matters even worse by deciding to require a prevailing wage for the construction workers on all of these projects.
And a review of the State Assembly's current draft plan not only includes new prevailing wage standards, but don't make the changes permanent, creating a 2029 expiration date. Plus,
the Assembly's proposal would just require too much and essentially too many new restrictions and essentially make housing more expensive, not less.
When even Spectrum One, which carries water for the Democratic Party across New York all the time, I've seen them lie for Democratic politicians over and over and over again, are saying, hey, you know, this is actually going to make building more difficult. Somehow we decided to find a way to do that in the state of New York. You know you have a problem, but I want to address this point by point. So first and foremost, we're going to go over the inclusionary zoning. And as you can see, one of the conditions for qualifying for this environmental waiver is a multifamily unit residential building where no less than 50% of the dwelling units are affordable and shall be retained subject to an anticipated regulatory agreement with a local, state, or federal government entity, or not-for-profit entity with anticipated formal agreement with a local, state, or federal government entity for the purposes of providing affordable housing in a locality or region, provided that period of affordability for the dwelling unit deemed affordable under the provisions of this M1 blah 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 whatever shall be for no less than 15 years from the date of construction. Now also, I really appreciate the fact that the New York Assembly wanted to let us know that this was printed on recycled paper, as they destroy everything with this legislation. It's nice that they're green about it, because again, this might be confusing to you guys out there in the audience who don't live in a stupid ass city or stupid ass state like New York City or New York State, but it's important for you to understand that essentially, as a requirement, if you want to build more units, New York City and New York State have inclusionary zoning mandates, which means that you have to reserve a certain amount of units in these apartment buildings below market value in order to build more units. And of course, this is supposed to lead to more affordable housing, but considering we've been doing inclusionary zoning since the 70s, since back in the day, obviously this has not worked. Obviously, this is a failed policy, and of course, it has been proven time and time again that inclusionary zoning requirements drive down construction. Now, again, for those of you who are not math wizards or scientific geniuses, that mean supply go down, demand go up. That mean price go up. It makes things significantly worse. And in fact, we actually talked about on this channel how Portland, Maine decided that they were going to increase their inclusionary zoning requirement from 10% of the units that need to be reserved in these multifamily buildings to 25%. And what do you think happened as a result of that? Well, in Portland, Maine, they stopped building multifamily units altogether so that they would not have to deal with the inclusionary zoning requirements. Get a load of this chart right here that again has to do with permits in these particular categories before and after the mandate, which by the way, you can tell by looking at the chart when it kicked in. So this chart ranges from 2016 to 2024. The law was put into place in 2022, and as you could see in 2021, there were 844 completed units that are not in the inclusionary zoning category, and there were 97 completed units that fit within the inclusionary zoning category. Now that's a little more than 10%, which was required by Portland, Maine prior to the change, but after the change, we ended up with this. So in 2022, housing units completed dropped from 844 to 87, and the number of inclusionary zoning units, because again, they required them for multifamily properties, I believe 4 units or over, ended up being 0. In 2023, they ended up with 67 non-inclusionary zoning units and just 1 inclusionary zoning unit. And in 2024, they had 18 units built total, and again, 0 inclusionary zoning units. So Portland, Maine tried to increase the number of rent-controlled units that were being built in their city. In 2021, before the law went into effect, there were nearly 100 of these units completed. However, in the 3 preceding years after this law went into effect, there was just 1 of these units. And by the way, overall construction took a dramatic hit. We're talking a 90+% reduction in overall apartments being built in Portland, Maine, after a policy that was allegedly intended to address the affordability crisis. Well, guess what? That was when you upped the requirement from 10% to 25%. This New York law requires 50% of the units, half of the units, twice as bad as the Portland, Maine policy that failed again within our lifetime. We can look at it for ourselves. That is what is being pushed forward in New York State, again, in a law that was supposedly going to make it easier to build. Now, I'll also remind you that New York State passed a 2019 rent control law that actually controls the rents even in unoccupied apartments, when you used to actually be able to get a rent adjustment to the current market rate if you did much needed repairs on that apartment, but now that is gone. So we've already had 40,000 units pulled from the market in just New York City due to that previous rent control law, and this requires more of the units in these new buildings to be under the rent control regime. And by the way, remember how it said the 15-year minimum for this statewide exemption? That is the minimum, again, from the state, but the local areas like New York City have much longer extended periods. So I want to move on to the prevailing wage requirement, which again, in conjunction with these inclusionary zoning requirements that already make these projects completely financially unviable, it should be obvious why this is destined to fail. But again, the premise is probably very appealing to a left-wing progressive that doesn't believe in trade-offs, that doesn't believe in economics, that doesn't believe in math or anything logic-based, because it's like, hey, I'm gonna pay people a lot of big money in order to build very cheap apartments that are gonna rent for well below market value, and I'm sure 100% private developers are gonna get on board with that. But obviously, this is not the case. Obviously, this is not true. But again, with prevailing wage requirements, this requires prevailing wage studies, which is yet another delay in order to figure out just what you're obligated by law to pay the construction workers in order to build these properties. Now, prevailing wage is often thought of as union wage, which means that you're going to pay a significantly higher cost for labor, not to mention all the additional costs on construction that New York State already has built in, and then the local municipalities also have built in, which we're not even going to get into. We're not even going to talk about that. We don't got time for that right now, guys. Stop trying to get me into that and make this video 6 hours long. But yeah, so you're going to have to pay more for labor. Half the units that you're going to build are never going to make money. And by the way, over time, the rate of increase of those rents is going to be capped. So you're going to lose more and more money as years go on. But then the remaining units are still more expensive to build. So obviously the result of this is going to be no projects being built under these parameters. And by the way, this isn't hypothetical. This isn't something that I'm just sussing out with my third eye or anything of the sort. This is what happened when these laws were put into place in the state of California. They had a law called AB 2011 that had this exact same requirement. And guess what? No AB 2011 projects were built. Yeah, you heard that right. None, nada, zilch, nothing was built. Nothing was built in this category. If you qualify for this particular legislation and regulatory framework, nothing was built when they instituted these rules. And New York Democrats looked at that and they thought to themselves, you know what? The governor said, hey, let's make it easier to build. Let's simplify environmental review. Let's say that a strip mall is not a marshland, is not something that needs to be protected by environmentalists, and actually build some housing if all the stores in that strip mall went out of business. And they said, you know what? Let's tack on some rules like they had in the state of California that actually literally made it impossible to build. And by the way, to make this even more absurd, because all of these environmental rules and regulations, they've been on the books for a very long time. And once they go on the books, they're on the books forever. But this simplified review process that the New York State Assembly is supposedly trying to put forward, that actually makes it significantly more complicated and adds more rent control somehow, for the love of God, what is wrong with these people? It only would exist for 3 years. So yeah, the reductions in the environmental review process that are slightly incorporated in this would expire in 3 years, but all these new requirements add years to the process. So if this were to pass and to go into effect, you would basically be delayed 3 years by all the new rules and regulation. Then the law would expire. Then you would be subject to all the previous environmental reviews. And honestly, I just want to die. I just want it to be over. Just take me right now, turn me into this this skeleton because New York is, again, just impossible to solve any of its problems. It's embarrassing. And what's even more embarrassing about this is that I cite Austin all the time, cities in Florida, Nashville, Tennessee, Colorado. I believe Denver cleaned up their zoning code. Minneapolis. Again, it works everywhere it's been tried, people. Every single location where you clean up your zoning and just make it easier to build. And by the way, if you ban rent control and rent stabilization, then building gets even better and then prices go down even faster. Everywhere it's been tried, that 100% works. But it works in New York as well. There is a city called New Rochelle. New Rochelle is 30 minutes north of New York City. Again, people who work in New York City can live in New Rochelle. They could take a train, get there in the morning, work, and then go back. They decided that they were going to clean up their zoning code and start approving more building of apartments. And apartment stock in New Rochelle rose by 37% as a result. And this is why, despite the fact that just 30 minutes away, 20 miles south from New Rochelle, where rents are skyrocketing in the city of New York, New Rochelle has seen rents fall, drop, go lower, build more supply, price go down. Real simple concept. Again, it works everywhere it's been tried, including in New Rochelle. And the crazy thing is that this law, this new requirement from the state of New York, would actually make it harder for New Rochelle to maintain their success by normalizing the whole process and making it even dumber with these new statewide regulations. So please, for the love of God, stop these people. Just make them stop. Vote them out of office. There's an election this year. Throw Governor Kathy Hochul out on her ass. Get a Republican that actually wants to deregulate in terms of building, and you will win New York for a very long time. For the love of God, just make it end. Make it over. Make these people just say April Fool's tomorrow, and not in the way that they do every year where they just screw us over, but in the way that they were just joking about being absolute idiots for decades, so we can actually have some actual housing stock increase in the state of New York. But honestly, don't hold your breath, because it's very likely never going to happen, because if history is an indicator and a predictor, they'll try to make it easier to build while making it 10x more difficult. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about the madness, the maddening policy proposals in the state of New York. Till next time.